Over to you, Glenn. Let's talk about the Middle East because you are the CIA guy. You belong to the Central Intelligence Agency that in 1953 was manipulated by MI6 to conduct a coup in the interests of Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, not even an American company. And therefore, original sin is your forte.
Well, we've created opportunity for 75 years in the Middle East now as a result. When we look at, of course, the events of the past several weeks in particular, which is what we'll talk about, have alarmed everybody and drawn the attention. But I don't intend to be facetious or dismissive here when I say, however, that it is the shiny object that draws the attention of the eye, and that I think the U.S. actions, the attack, the attack, may have less consequence than most all of us assume to be the case. There have been profound strategic structural changes to the power dynamics in the Middle East since October 7, 2023. But and they are related, of course, to the U.S. attack. But the attack itself, I think, will add up to have fewer consequences than we initially thought. So what do I mean? Let's look first. Who are the players in this? There are three, really: the U.S., Israel, and Iran. And this being the American attack in the last several weeks. So, what are Israel's assessment of the nature of the Iranian regime and the threat that Iran may pose, or they believe it poses? And what are Iran's objectives? Now, there's no single voice because there are a diversity of views in Israel, most societies, most governments, certainly in the case of Israel. But the dominant faction, as we know, is the right wing of the political spectrum. I can never recall the names of the parties at present beyond Likud, but Bibi Netanyahu depends on them for his political existence and maintenance
Glenn,
and power.
The two arch villains are Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, both of whom have talked about genocide, both of whom are hardline, and Bibi is in bed with them to persist his rule or to prolong his rule.
Right.
He fears being tried for corruption, and so he's gone into bed with these guys. There was a time when he was more centrist and he had a government with Ehud Barak, but now it is all nutters in charge.
Well, I'll let you say they're nutters, but their objectives, not exclusively and not with certainty or total purity of no division of thought, are to colonize, to seize, to make once again Israel all of the West Bank and Gaza itself, which means the expulsion of the Palestinians who are not there by right because 2,000 years ago the Jews were, and to destroy the Iranian regime as the only solution. Those are not necessarily crazy objectives, but they are, in today's context, certainly extreme. So the assessment is that Iran...
that is not necessarily the objective of all of Israel.
Correct. Oh, absolutely.
There are many Israeli politicians who oppose this. In particular, the intelligence and the special forces people tend to be secular, and they certainly oppose Bibi Netanyahu himself, maybe not openly. The head of Shin Bet has left, or probably is leaving. I think he's probably left, and that caused a lot of controversy. So there are wheels within wheels, and it would be unfair to tar entirety of Israel polity.
Absolutely, they're the faction that they're the faction that controls the government, or Netanyahu, and shapes to which Netanyahu must respond in policy. He can't stray too far from a position that would lead them to leave the coalition and then subject him to prosecution. I think clearly throughout most of Israeli history up to the present, a strong majority, or certainly a majority, absolute majority of the population has embraced policies that oppose that were in favor of a two-state solution and negotiated solution with Iran, but they don't control the power right now. So the assessment is that Iran is an existential threat. Iran is developing a nuclear weapon, and that is absolutely unacceptable because that is places Israel's and all Jews' survival more than at risk, but on the brink of extermination. That U.S. and that regime change in Iran is fundamental. It's necessary to change the strategic equation, and that to do that, there must be U.S. involvement because really that's beyond the capabilities of Israel alone. And then the other factor that we touched upon is that hostility to Iran, war with Iran, continuing war in Gaza are necessary to Bibi Netanyahu's political survival and maintaining power as prime minister. That's the perspective of the Iranians. The U.S.'s assessment differs some. And they were Tulsi Gabbard, who was not someone I have praised, I think, ever, did a competent job during her testimony to the U.S. Congress in presenting the U.S. intelligence community's assessment. She read verbatim the assessment, which was that Iran is not does not possess a nuclear weapon, and that Ayatollah Khamenei, the spiritual leader of the regime, the leader of the regime or the government, has not reauthorized that the Iranian nuclear program manufacture a weapon, but that the Iranian nuclear program has been secretly developing weapons-grade fissile material for which there is only one use, and that is to make a nuclear weapon, and that Iran was anything from days, which is what the Israelis assert, to a good number of months away from being able to manufacture one. So Trump was faced with a decision. He had to what does he think is happening before he decides what to do? And he has put himself in a box by saying that the U.S. will no longer engage in forever wars, which would preclude an invasion, and at the same time that he will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. Then he aligned himself with the right-wing Israeli assessment, which is that, and this is why he criticized and was characterized as having disagreed with Tulsi Gabbard. He said she is wrong. That's a classical Trump statement, actually. It was just crude, but what he was actually saying was that it is irrelevant to him that they don't have a weapon, that the Iranian capability to manufacture one was an existential threat. He aligned himself, once again, with the far right of the Israeli political spectrum, and just as he has with Vladimir Putin and Russian issues. And so therefore, the choice was, okay, how do we stop what is unacceptable? And he was on the horns of the dilemma because all of his advisors said what Americans should have learned through painful experience, that destroying a regime is relatively easy, but in a nation of 90 million people, of a vastly different culture, without any visible alternative, be it a party or a number of individuals or power center, to the current regime, that to say, as I did in a number of interviews, that the consequences would be fraught, his decision was fraught with consequences, is an understatement. And he, realizing that, he thought, how do I find a way out of this? And he chose what I expected would actually be the case, to do a minimalist attack on nuclear capabilities and to declare victory. And of course, the other side gets a say. Iran as as the attacked party can decide to act as it wishes. But that's what Trump actually did, which was a frankly coherent response for an impossible dilemma of his own making. Now, the Iranians consistently have shown for years, and in particular since 7 October 2023, that their top priority is national regime survival. They are not crazies at all. They're very subtle and astute. And they have signaled repeatedly that they wanted some way out short of open war. And that's what they did in this instance by informing the Qatari government, therefore the United States, in advance of their response, where and when they would respond, and then making it a one-off, sending missiles to America's largest base, which is symbolically striking the heart of the U.S. presence in the Middle East, and then stopping, which Trump has seized upon. So in the scheme of the catastrophic situation that obtains, this was pretty much a minimalist sequence of events. Because the alternative would be a regime change, which is impossible to predict, or simply accepting that Trump had put himself in a box and couldn't do anything that made any sense. Yeah, Atul, sorry.
So a little bit of context, because both of us think about history. In fact, that's all we think about. We are fuddy-duddies from the past. So very quickly, let's run through what the Israelis did. The Israelis decapitated the top Iranian leadership. It was spectacular special ops. Mossad and whoever acted, all these special ops forces who acted in favor of
it's certainly one of the great intelligence operations in history.
Of all time.
Tactically brilliant, flawless, and a great success, but tactics are not strategy.
Exactly. But let's get to what they did. So they decapitate, and they've told me in private, some of them, that we can kill anyone, anywhere, anytime. Importantly, they did it at a time when US and Iran were having negotiations. And so our colleague Peter Isaacson says, look, this is extremely duplicitous because now diplomacy, which already had a bad name, is further discredited. Maybe. Diplomacy has always been duplicitous, but this was taking it a little too far. So the Israeli jubilation over the success of A, taking out the top military leadership, and B, then hitting the nuclear and missile sites. They hit a number of military installations, and they hit them pretty well. And apparently, they were able to control Iranian airspace. That's what they claim. Of course, the Iranians counter that. Doesn't matter. What is also true is that the Iranians managed to hit Israel as well. It wasn't exactly painless for Israel. They've hit the business district, they've hit apartment buildings, and the Israeli economy is under immense strain. So Israel is paying a heavy price.
However, that's one of the areas where the Israelis' assessment wisely was more pessimistic than the reality. In the range of possibilities, it's wise to skew towards the more dangerous options. And they had been anticipating from hundreds to thousands of casualties. And there have been, I think, 25, or I forget what it is, with 400 injured. Whatever the number is, an order of magnitude less than they had anticipated. And yes. The Iranian counterstrike capabilities have been shown to be less powerful than the Israelis had feared.
Yeah, but the economic dislocation is immense, and there's also an argument that they may be holding some of their powder dry. So we don't know yet. And the Israelis do believe that the Iranian regime, is a paper tiger. They believe it's utterly corrupt. They believe they've infiltrated the Iranian regime at all levels. Remember, they killed the Palestinian leader of Hamas in a VIP guest house. That is the equivalent of killing someone in Blair House in Washington, D.C., which is next to the White House. So the Israelis...
That's the mansion where all heads of state visiting the United States will stay.
Yeah. So clearly they've demonstrated that the regime may puff itself up and breathe fire, but the regime simply is not as cohesive, is not as effective, and simply not as united as it was in the aftermath of the 1979 revolution. The Israelis also believe this, it's now or never. I mean, for Bibi Netanyahu, it is, if not now, when? If not us, who? Because he sees himself as the savior of Israel, the guarantor of Israeli security, and he has a view, a messianic view of himself. Remember, his brother died in Entebbe, Yoni Netanyahu. He was Seret Matkal, the elite commando unit in which Bibi served as well, and Bibi has never forgiven nor forgotten his brother's death. So he believes Iran is an existential threat, and with Hamas weakened, Hezbollah's top leadership dead, and the Assad regime gone, this is a great opportunity to hit Iran, because the danger from proxies is minimal. The ultimate goal for the Israelis is regime change. Their dream scenario would be a regime that is liberal and tolerant and friendly with Israel. After all, the baby Shah, his daughter has married a Jewish lad. If he was to go back and there could be the pre-1979 bonhomie between Israel and Iran, that would be lovely. But there are wrinkles. Regime change is expensive, takes time, and even though the Americans would agree that ultimately Iran can only have peace if this vicious regime of mullahs goes, because this 1979 revolution brought in a Shia ideology based on fanaticism, based on martyrdom, based on opposition to evil Uncle Sam. And of course, evil Uncle Sam had started this whole game in a way inadvertently by taking out Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, entirely unnecessary. Iran could have evolved in a very different direction. But 1979 led to this crazy Islamic regime. And of course, some believe that perhaps the best thing should be to take out Ayatollah Khamenei. But going back to the Israelis, they believe that regime change and a weakening of Iran, if they could do to Iran what they've done to Syria, meaning the Azeris could have a little bit of territory, the Kurds could be a little more autonomous, and the various minorities, the various ethnicities, and the Sunni minority, which is persecuted. Because remember, the Fars majority, speaking Farsi, is 60%. Iran's birth rate is not what it was in 1979. It's actually below 2. It's below replacement level. So Iran is not the country it was. And there is a belief amongst the Israelis that they can put pressure and squeeze Iran. Now, the British, who have longer memory, and of course they installed the earlier client regime, the Qajars, who were basically British pawns, and so were, in some way or another, the later rulers. And when Reza Shah didn't play ball, the British conveniently dispatched him and installed his feckless son. So the British, who were the great arch-villains of 1953, today act the wise men and women, and they say not so fast. They are skeptical. They point out that, yes, Israel has the Begin doctrine. Now, for those of you who don't know the Begin doctrine, in 1981, Menachem Begin destroyed an Iraqi nuclear reactor through an air attack. And remember, back during the fight for Israel, there was Haganah, which was secular and centrist, and there was the more right-wing Irgun and Stern Gang, and Begin came from the more right-wing Irgun, if I remember correctly. Or maybe
let's not give too much let's not give too much stage time to powers that had power 3 generations ago.
Okay, fine. So the Begin Doctrine, that is not Britain, of course. The Begin Doctrine is none of Israel's enemies or potential enemies should be able to have nuclear weapons. The Begin Doctrine still underpins Israeli national security. And Ehud Olmert, following this doctrine, destroyed Syrian nuclear facilities in 2007. And Netanyahu tried to follow the Begin Doctrine against Iran twice between 2009 and 2013. So all of this has happened before. And now, of course, was the opportunity, and they've hit. But both the British and the Iranians point out that, look, Iran has imperial memory, and Iran may be corrupt, but it's more cohesive than its enemies imagine. Also, as someone pointed out, what happens when you kill military officers at the top? Well, you achieve paralysis in the short term, great tactical advantage. But who replaces them? It's a younger lot, younger men, who may be more competent and will certainly have more testosterone. And all of them know that they have a bullet with their name written on it. So they might be proper nutters, to quote a friend. And so killing off the top layer may be great in the short run, may enable you to strike many targets, but it may not necessarily lead to regime change. There's also another issue that Iran in the past has showed that it has been able to survive chaos. In 1980, Saddam Hussein attacked Iran. It was in post-revolutionary disarray. And despite 8 years of war and despite Western support, including CIA support, Saddam Hussein couldn't dislodge this theocratic, not theological, theocratic regime. So Iran may be more cohesive than the Israelis imagine, and there may be what some people call, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, I'm not a native Farsi speaker, even though Farsi was the official language of India till 1858. Zira Parcham, rally to the flag. So there might be a little bit of rallying to the flag because of Israeli attacks. Nationalism may take over, as it does in any country under attack. Look at Pakistan. In the conflict, the unpopular military suddenly became popular. And regime change may be far more difficult than people imagine it to be. And our estimation is it probably may be a bridge too far. However,
and this is why, other than the right wing, as you characterize them, the secular professionals in the intelligence services, the IDF, which is the Israeli military, in the opposition, which is probably majority population representative of, all think that the desire of Netanyahu and the far right to do what you've been talking about is a bridge too far. Puts it nicely, is not possible. You know, what's the saying? If wishes were wings, then pigs could fly, or some such sort of thing as that. So, I like to talk about the short term. Not so much more about the reasonings, but the short-term and medium-term consequences, and then fundamentally the strategic consistencies, which is why I said this American action may prove to be a flash in the mountains as opposed to the pan. The fundamental issues remain unchanged. Iran retains its potential to manufacture a nuclear weapon, even if all of the scientists involved in the program were assassinated. Pandora's box opened millennia ago, and Adam ate of the apple millennia ago, and you can't kill knowledge. And Iran's a sophisticated society with millions of brilliant people who can study science.
Yeah, unlike Ted Cruz, we do know the population of Iran. It is 90 million. We do know that the Fars people are 60% of the population. We do know the various ethnicities. There is the CIA fact book for those of you who want a quick read. I'm sure Glenn probably wrote a bit of it. So there you go.
I did.
So,
long superseded from long ago. It's updated every year. Yeah, it's a wonderful product. Anyway, so there's no agreement on limitations or definitions of what Iran can and may not do concerning nuclear research and development. And then something we haven't talked about at all, but which remains in many ways one of the two pillars of shaping the Middle East is the Palestinian issue is not resolved at all, except that 2/3, I think it's 70% of all structures in Gaza have been destroyed, and a quarter of the population is on the imminent brink of literal starvation. So the fundamentals have not changed, and Trump realized, I think, and this is shocking that I'm saying something that seems vaguely complimentary of the fellow, that regime change was not possible, and to do it would make Afghanistan and Iraq look like a birthday party. So the regime may be, certainly has been weakened and may be subject to collapse, the regime meaning Iran.
I mean, eventually in the long run, just a quick comment. Eventually in the long run, just as communism collapsed, so will the Iranian regime, because it is,
and it will be stable until the day it's not.
Things last until they don't, and that is inevitable. But
the problem is there's
Iran, just one point, 20% of Iran still lives in villages, and the people who live in those villages are still largely in favor of this regime. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah. Well, and all of us are students of Stalin. I think he said revolution, or maybe it was Lenin, I forget. Revolutions are born at the end of a gun rather than through talk.
Yeah.
And the barrel of a gun. And that's really true. Whoever has the monopoly of power, or more power, I mean the ability to use force, lethal force, calls the shots, not to make an unintended
I'll add to your point very quickly. Let's assume the regime falls, the mullahs fall. Will it be women protesting in the streets who take over, or will it be Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps? It'll be IRGC.
Factions, absolutely.
Because they have the guns. Unless the women protesting in the streets can convince a section of the military to side with them, and that military turns its guns, that section of the military turns its guns on the IRGC, we are left with the specter of a Pakistan like Iran. The mullahs may go, and then you may have a military leadership that takes over, or an Egypt like Iran.
Which is why we have seen, in particular in 1980, 79, 80, and 81, literally hundreds of military officers lying in, where do you put dead people? I forget. In their coffins, and filmed by the regime to show what happens to anyone who's even a potential opponent. They killed virtually all of the military leaders, those who didn't flee. So fundamentally, the dynamics, I think, remain the same. However, that's structural, that's long term. Things have fundamentally changed, however, in the Middle East, and that's not because of the U.S. attack, but rather because of Israel's brilliant decimation, more than decimation. Decimation implies 1/10 destruction of Hezbollah and Hamas, not destroyed, but seriously weakened and not cowed, but forcing itself into defense, and of the Iraqi Shia factions supported by Iran too, which means that Syria now has been so far under an erstwhile jihadist moving to become a state not aligned with Russia and Iran, and Hezbollah is not capable at present of acting in any way that's especially dangerous to Israel or to the region. And so you do see a structural change, and those changes can be lasting. They may not. It depends on how things play out in Syria. But the deeper issue of whether Iran has not been addressed. So that's what I think is likely to emerge from this if Trump remains restrained, despite his rhetoric, on the whole.
So very quickly, there'll be broader implications of this conflict. The US is now back in the Middle East, so therefore attention to Ukraine will be lower and lesser. Ukrainians will be out more and more on their own. China will have more of a freer hand in the Far East. They will squeeze Taiwan. Now, of course, the aircraft carriers are not going anytime soon near Taiwan. Pakistan and Asim Munir met Trump. Field Marshal Asim Munir. General Asim Munir has now become Field Marshal Asim Munir. He is extremely popular, apparently. Not quite, but he's now popular enough. And he met Donald Trump for a closed-door lunch in the White House. And I'm sure, he's promised to be goody two-shoes as far as Iran is concerned, because Iran's eastern border is with Pakistan. And if you go back a few centuries, the Mughals and the Safavids fought a lot for control of Kandahar in Afghanistan. So Sunnis and Shias have fought for that part of the world forever. And he'll have a freer hand against India. So expect fireworks by September, because the Pakistanis will feel less contained and controlled. So the spillover effects are going to be profound, and they are going to be global. And it ain't peace for our times yet. I don't think we can give Donald Trump the peace prize yet, because anything could still happen. The Israelis believe there is unfinished business. The Iranians believe there's unfinished business. So things could flare up. This is a fragile truce. Let's see what happens.
But I don't think things will flare up in the Middle East for at a level that we've seen for several years, because Iran will lick its wounds, and they won't come close in the immediate short-term future to being 3 days and building a nuke, and then we'll return to the crisis from before. To me, the one structural
priority is to get a nuke now, because they will look at neighboring Pakistan and they will say, we want the nuclear insurance. Because if we have the nuclear insurance, then we can be a corrupt government. We can go to the IMF 100 times, not 100, but you know what I mean, 20.
Well,
we'll always be bailed out.
Yeah, that gets to the interesting difference, generally speaking, between the U.S. assessment and the Israeli. The U.S. assessment has been, and I think it's the correct one, that Iran had its nuclear weapons development program as this inoculation from great power and from the United States invasion and regime change. The Israelis say, well, that may be true or not, but we don't care, because that's an existential threat to us. And who in his right mind will accept an existential threat, which could cause instantaneous destruction if we can stop it? And those are legitimate positions on both sides. And I think that's what happened. To me, my last sentence, and then we have to turn on to the catastrophes happening in America, is the global significance. I think we're seeing already play out, and you touched upon it, and that's how China will very wisely, astutely, if not wisely, increase its level of pressure on Taiwan's sovereignty through more border incursions into international waters or Taiwanese waters, more numbers of ships and flights and so on, so that the status quo of what is acceptable prior to saying we have to fight to stop this shifts. And that's been ongoing. And I think we've seen this as a direct consequence of America's mucking around with Iran and then stepping back. But let's talk about how America's collapsed.
Very quickly, two things. One is that the nuclear program was begun not by the mullahs, but by the Shah of Iran. That's a very important point to remember. So we can't just tie it with the regime. And then revolution is not a dinner party, and political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Mao Zedong quotes Stephen Schleicher, a former State Department diplomat, has just pointed out.
Of course,
he's in the audience, and Peter Isaacson points out that the moral police have dialed down a little bit in Iran, which is also true. They had to, because the protests were getting too much. And he says they will not lead to a revolution. Well, yeah, not yet, Peter. But the way society is going, you can't keep people in Nizari Shia Islam with its memory of martyrdom and Hashishin assassins going against Sunni persecution and the paranoid persecuted mentality forever. And one final correction before we move on. One person survived the Air India plane. Shiju Verghese points out that is a factual mistake we made. Not everyone died. So one miraculous survivor. So I think now that we have finished with US Iran, US ménage à trois, we can move on to the deterioration of US political norms.
I think the most likely happy solution, or the most likely solution, may ultimately prove to be positive from a Western perspective, is the MBS evolution. That the regime changes, but that is, there are successors. One of them is more educated, more internationalist, less millennial in his convictions, and the regime evolves without collapsing.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.